What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Corporate Bartender. Happy late Valentine's Day to everybody that does that sort of thing. Speaking of the holidays, we're getting caught up with the last episode that we recorded in 2023, and we're super excited to have Jeff Skipper on the program. Don't know Jeff? Well, you will in about an hour. Jeff is an international change leadership consultant who's been focused on the people side of change for over 25 years. He's the author of Dancing with Disruption, Leading Dramatic Change During Global Transformation, and we're going to dig in. You're going to hear about all sorts of things: hot dogs, Ikea, change frameworks. This conversation was amazing, and I think you're going to dig it. So buckle up, TCBers, grab your favorite cocktail, and let's get right on into it with Jeff Skipper and today's TCB.
Welcome to SkyTeam's The Corporate Bartender, where we gather some of the best HR and people leaders to discuss what's happening on the people side of business. Now pull up a stool, belly up to the bar, and join us for The Corporate Bartender.
Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday. You know what that means. It's your favorite day and mine. It's Corporate Bartender Day. It is, can you believe it, the 20th of December of 2023. This is our last TCB episode of 2023 because next week is Christmas and the week after that is New Year's, and we are going to be taking some time off to recharge the old batteries and produce some of these backlog of episodes that I've got sitting on my hard drive so I can get those out. This is the 185th time we have convened this group of awesome people, and I'm excited. Today's going to be a good day. We've got a guest. His name is Jeff Skipper, and he's the guy in your display that you don't recognize. He's the author of Dancing with Disruption, Leading Dramatic Change During Global Transformation. It's a big topic, so we're looking forward to getting into that with Jeff. He's got a framework around leading change. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the difference between managing change and leading change, because I think we use those terms interchangeably from time to time. That's going to be a good conversation. We've got guests stacking up for 2024. First guest, this is the 11th of January, Lori Mazon. She's going to be here. She's the author of Leadership Revolution, The Future of Developing Dynamic Leaders. I'm a sucker for a good framework, so I'm looking forward to that conversation. Hey, Ruby. January 24th, Charlie Gilkey is going to be here. He's the author of Team Habits, How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results. Ruby and I were on Charlie's show in the lead up to the launch of You, Me, We. It was the first podcast that we did for the book, and we did it together, and that was fun. Charlie's a good guy, and he has a pretty good framework as well. And just because it's frameworks aplenty here, coming up at the end of January, on the 31st, we have Marcia Acker, who has this book. It's called Build Your Model for Leading Change, and it's like a workbook. And I really like it. I've been flipping through it, and I see a lot of ways that we can implement this into the work that we do here at SkyTeam. So guests aplenty. I've got more. I figured getting us through January is probably enough for today. So with that, we will turn our attention to Jeff Skipper. Let's give him a big TCB welcome, shall we? Just seeing if you're paying attention. All right, let's give him a big TCB welcome. Are you ready? Here we go. We dance him in, Jeff. That's how we do it.
Love
it. Awesome. Jeff is an international change leadership consultant. He's worked in all kinds of industries. He's done this for over 25 years. He was one of those blue tie guys at IBM for 12 years. So he's done the big corporate thing. He's done the outside on his own thing. And he's from the nicest place on earth. He's from Calgary, Canada.
You're right.
Good day. He's the author, as I said before, of Dancing with Disruption, Leading Dramatic Change During Global Transformation. And today we're going to talk about his framework. What does it mean to lead change, and why is it important that we focus in on a few details that are oft overlooked? But before we get into that, Jeff, we always want to know a little bit about the backstory. Because I don't imagine that in your childhood days, you said, I am going to grow up to be a change agent and expert in the art of leading change. So tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you found yourself here with us today.
Yeah, it's a great question. I started off into my university days thinking I'm going to be a sociologist. So I'm going to study groups and how they work. And into my very first university course, I hated it. It was awful. This is no good. I'm already off track for my career. So I flipped over to psychology, lots of overlap, similarities, and really enjoyed that. But there was one course in organizational psychology, which is the mix of business into psychology, and I fell in love. So here's this practical application of these psychological concepts to really helping organizations perform at their best. And I just love the idea of being able to help organizations get the most out of their people and help people feel most fulfilled at work. And off I went from there. I ended up, as you said, at IBM for 12 years before going out on my own as an independent. And it's been nonstop.
Fantastic. So change, I mean, it's a big meaty topic. How did this become your focal point for this book?
Well, during my time at IBM, I was faced with a pretty significant change. So I was almost a year into my job, and one of my first assignments was, Jeff, we would like you to help write some training around one of our most important products, the AS400. And I said, what's that? I had no idea.
I remember the AS400.
Right. I had no technology background. I ended up in their career department, part of their HR team, and said, I don't know if I'm in the right place. And they actually put me through a battery of interest profiles and figure out, well, what might be a good fit for you. And number one was bus driver. I freely admit that fact.
Fantastic.
I think that happened because it tapped into, I loved people. I loved working with people, and I would meet people all day long on the bus. Anyways, I decided to ignore the casual advice, which was maybe you should look for something somewhere else. I stuck it out and ended up falling in love with technology and the fact that so many people really needed help adapting as technology changed, and they need to figure out what to do with it, or whether to do these massive upgrades or implement new systems. How do we get our people on board? And I'm like, hey, I can use that background, all that study I did in psychology, for good and not evil. So why not really embrace it? And I started out in their performance consulting practice. How do we get the greatest degree of performance out of people? Eventually moving into strategy and change as well. So that's the short version. I had to myself embrace, am I going to make technology part of my career or not? And I said yes, and it's been a successful journey.
I love it. I love it. So change, I mean, we talk about it a lot here on the show and in our regular work lives. You know, we say there are three truths, right? Death, taxes, and change. That's the only thing we can count on. And we're led to believe that change is hard because people don't like it. Oh, is that true, Jeff? Is change hard?
No, that's like a trigger phrase for me. you hear it so often, change is hard. I have fellow consultants in this domain that say it regularly. And honestly, I want to, pull them aside and have a little conversation with them.
Well, Jeff's a hockey player, everybody. So that's, what that means in hockey talk, pull them aside.
Right.
He's going to get 5 for fighting after that.
5 for fighting. Yes. So we do hear this in media. I've tracked some of the headlines. You see it come up fairly regularly. People don't like change. They're resistant. And the fact of the matter is that's completely untrue. I mean, you just look at what happens when well, not as much these days, but when a brand new Apple device was announced, people would line up.
Yeah.
We now, you don't line up, but when we do that upgrade. It happens once in a while. We need a new phone. Does it come with a manual? No. Are we able to figure it out? Yes. If we need help, what do? We ask one of our kids or a grandchild, or we go to YouTube and we figure it out.
Yeah.
People want the new phones. They want those changes. They want changes that have an advantage for them. So people are constantly looking for opportunities in the environment to do better. We talk about shiny object syndrome, right? We get distracted by things. Why is that? Because your brain is tuned for change. You're looking for it all the time. When something moves in the environment, we immediately go there because, yes, it could be a threat and say, well, it's fight or flight. Right. But it's not always fight or flight. Sometimes it's flourish that, hey, that's really interesting. It's entertaining, or I could make use of that. I'm going to go there now. So we embrace change all of the time. We just don't think about it.
That's
great.
That's flipping it over, right? It's not that change is hard. We crave it on some evolutionary level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's easy to get caught up, in change initiatives when things happen, corporate restructures, we move things around. It's easy to get like all mired in the details about which you largely can't control. Right. So as a leader faced with a change effort, how do you simmer down and get your mind around it before the train leaves the station?
From a leader's perspective or from an employee's perspective?
From a leader's perspective, especially in getting those employees to get on that train.
Okay. So you said a very important word when you went into this line of inquiry, and you used the word control. And I'm going to throw it out there now, folks. Listen to all the words that start with the letter C as we go through this interview, because you're going to find it interesting. But control is key because when people do start to resist, or they fear, or they get upset, it's often because they feel a lack of control. So with so much going on, what's happening is I feel like I can no longer accurately predict my future.
Right.
So generally, when I'm coming into work the next day, I know what's going to happen, the things I'm going to need to do. But as I start to look out 3 months, 6 months, it starts getting murky. And I don't know what that's going to look like, because some new projects are on the horizon. And I know there's going to be a realignment of people, and there might be a shift in my reporting relationship, which is going to disrupt the power structure. And now I just don't know. And so that unpredictability creates discomfort. Now, some of us are totally okay with that. It was like, ambiguity is okay, adds a bit of excitement, but many are not. That's very uncomfortable. So part of the work I do with organizations is to say, find the anchor. So when it feels like everything is moving around me, I'm in the middle of the storm, it's a hurricane, I need something to hold on to that will not change, that fosters a sense of control and predictability. So I know when I come in tomorrow, that one thing will not change. And that's a key learning I've really tried to reinforce with organizations is it's not just about educating people around what's going to happen to make the future predictable. It's also about telling them what's not going to change, right? Yeah. So they know what they can hang on to and count on going forward.
We talk a lot about whether it's one person who's going to have a organizational change, or a team that's changing, or a bigger across the organization kind of change. I always repeat that kind of framework of stop, start, continue. Like to whatever degree you can define what's going to stop, what's going to start, and what's going to continue, so that they have at least a place to start from. And sometimes the conversation is, we're not exactly sure what we're going to stop, but I can tell you what's going to continue, right? Or start, whatever, right? And so you may not know every piece of every detail, but just acknowledging and giving them a starting place, because that's what I find, that it's not the change that's hard, it's uncertainty that's uncomfortable. 100%. And so the more certainty you bring, the quicker people can, move through. Yeah.
Right. So folks, to help you with your count, we've got control, and we've got, Lori just said continue or continuity. both are really important as we're looking at change and how we're going to help people through it. Lori, you also said we don't always know what some of the changes are going to be. There, even if I can tell you some things, other things will remain murky. But just letting folks know that we all recognize that not everything is defined yet. We can't 100% predict what the future is going to look like. The fact that you're telling me that, and now both of us share this reality that we're going to work some things out as we go, is still reassuring to me.
Yeah. Yep. Like it's not a blind spot that we haven't thought about it.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in your book, Dancing with Disruption, you have a framework for leading change. What does that look like? How do we embrace this framework?
When you get into this domain of leading change, there are so many different methodologies and I'll say frameworks and approaches. I really tried to actually take a specific methodology agnostic approach. So I've got these 12 strategies, regardless of whether some will recognize ProSci as a brand, whether you come out of the ProSci school or you come from the AIM school or use Cotter, these same 12 elements will show up in some shape or form, regardless of what your people have been educated with. But in looking over all the projects I've been a part of, whether they were technology implementations with IBM or they were restructurings or it's part of a merger, these 12 elements kept showing up. So just briefly, always start with setting out the objective. So, chapter 1 is set a clear goal, but then into your stakeholder identification, who are we talking about? How are they impacted? That impact assessment, developing your plan, actually leading the change, executing that plan, communicating along the way. And then we get into some really important specifics. I spent a fair amount of time talking about removing barriers. And the chapter that comes after it on resistance, they really go hand in hand. But if I can be proactive about figuring out barriers, I can reduce the amount of resistance. And then wrapping things up with measurements. How do I know I've been successful? How do I sustain success beyond, there's always some transition point. How do we keep that going? And then finally, a step that's often missed, and that's cleanup. So we saw this a lot during the pandemic of, there were still signs on the door a long time saying, must wear a mask, must sanitize, and you look through the window and no one's doing that stuff anymore. But they're still. I saw
one in a jetway yesterday, said stand 6 feet apart.
Right. Yeah. It's like they put those stickers on the floor and they use crazy glue. They just won't come off.
Right. Well, I loved that your program is a 12-step program, as all good programs are. And in strategy number 1, you said set a goal, but the title of the chapter is Start at the End. And it made me think of the change curve, William Bridges' change curve, that we use a lot. And basically the hook in that model is that change doesn't start with the beginning. It starts with letting go of the old way. There's a grief moment, right? It begins with the ending. And I think that's a thing that a lot of people try to gloss over when they're dealing with a change effort. And I've seen it in something as quote unquote meaningless as we're going to update our main software that we use to do our jobs. And, the buttons are going to be in a different space and the workflow is going to be slightly altered. And people grieve the old way of doing things.
Oh, Eric, you're so right. I used to say, if you just change the color of the screen, some people will think that you're threatening their job.
Yeah.
And then they laugh a bit and realize, yeah, that's kind of true.
Yeah,
it is. Because again, I don't know what all the implications of that. Sure, it looks like just a color change, but what else is going on?
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that I don't know about. So yeah, your comment is so important today because one of the big benefits that came out of the pandemic was it unlocked a greater ability to talk about our emotions, what we're feeling. So we had this whole thread around well-being and mental health in the workplace. So now I can feel a little freer, and I run exercises around this. Let's talk about the loss that comes with change. And that's controversial for some other practitioners, saying it's not the same as losing someone. It's not the same as mourning. Like, Are you kidding? You talk to some people around how they feel about change, and you'll see, that roller coaster of emotions, often associated with Kubler-Ross's diagram of mourning stages, right? But that the level of anxiety people feel, the pulling back, that all of a sudden they're retreating from others, and they need time to process in order to reach a state of acceptance. That's absolutely applicable to what people are feeling.
I learned that Bridges model, right? Endings, kind of neutral zone, and then beginnings. And what I loved about it was it's a nice linear path on paper. Very rarely is it linear in anybody's brain or heart, right? That it's like a trapeze for some people, and some people it's a quick trip, and for others it's a very painful back and forth. And so giving space for people to process it their own way while still needing to get things moving and to be encouraging and not get frustrated with, why am I having to explain this again for this person? And the other piece of it is, you've got that change curve going on, but what other 6 things are happening in their life that you don't know about, that maybe they're in the process of dealing with the change? And so it can be conflated with personal things. And
so we only have one bucket of energy, or what sustains us in terms of resilience. So if I'm dealing with parents who are ill, if I'm raising kids and doing homeschooling, maybe they've got some issues developmentally, where's my energy going? So now I come into the workplace and you're asking me to embrace change. Does that require more or less energy? Well, we know the answer is more. And what if I don't have the reserves? So is it the workplace's, or is it the leader's responsibility to be aware of what that individual's capacity is and what else they might be trying to balance? I think the answer is yes. Interesting, there's a retail chain in the UK called Timpson's, and they have a director of happiness. And she is quoted as saying she spends fully 1/3 of her time working on the financial situation of her employees. So helping renegotiate loans, renegotiate cell phone contracts, directing them to other resources to help them get credit counseling, that kind of thing. And so I often pose to audiences, why do you think that role exists? I mean, that's a significant investment by the company to help people with their personal finances, because it bleeds into the workplace. It has an impact. If folks are not worrying about their finances, can they focus more on doing a good job and satisfying their customers? Absolutely. So we can't draw these hard and fast lines between what's happening in your personal life and what's happening at work. And there are limits around that, of course, but it's all life. And again, we only have that one resource to draw upon to invest our energy in changes, work, or home. We got to balance those things out.
Yeah.
It's funny thinking about that, all the changes that people are dealing with at any one snapshot moment in time. And as leaders, a lot of times we know stuff before everybody else knows stuff.
Yeah.
And I've worked with many an executive who is frustrated when he or she make the announcement of the change and everybody's not right on board with it.
Right.
They're like, why? It makes sense. It's the right choice. How come everybody's not on board?
Yeah. And this is the RTC issue, is runway to change. So your runway may have been a year or longer. You've been thinking about this a long time. And then now we've given our employee groups, a week, a month, maybe, please get up. And you hit it, what's taking so long?
Right.
But leaders fail to reflect on the fact you've had a much longer timeline to adjust your thinking and prepare.
100%. So,
and you know what I'm thinking about, Eric, because we've been talking so much, and y'all use it in Sky Team with a lot of teams, and I'm rolling this into Cable Labs with our teams, with looking at DISC profiles, personality types, and preferences and tendencies. And I have to think that there's some level of propensity to adjust or resist that can come with the DISC style too, right? That perhaps the ones that are more biased to action, right? That they're more like, okay, I get it, let's go. And others who are like, whoa, so not enough time or data here. Right?
Yeah, as a C, I can speak to that, right?
Yeah.
I will resist until I can't any longer. Right? Because I'm always looking for the opportunity to collect one more piece of data, just a little more information. And then I'll be comfortable making that shift, which in reality isn't true, because I don't want to make the shift. So I'm just delaying the inevitable by putting it off for as long as I can. I think that's an interesting thing to think about layering into it, just like considering what's going on in somebody's whole life. Like, what are their preferences? Do they have this proclivity to move, or are they data people? Are they worried about how it's going to impact other humans, or are they more focused on crossing tasks off the list?
Right. You know, it's interesting. Yeah, no consultant is worth their salt unless they're good at doing 2x2 matrix, right? You got to be able to do
100%.
that, right? So the caution I always give, I think these tools are useful in terms of looking at personality, but even if we put on one continuum, openness to change, which is a good one, but then put on the other axis something that's about context, because even if I take Eric, who wants more data, in certain scenarios, he'll jump at the change. Just depends what it is. So we always have to keep that in mind, that personalities do tell us a fair bit about an individual, but the situation, the context matters a lot. And then I can even throw in, and we don't want to get beyond the 2x2 matrix, it's too complicated, but I throw in, Lori's comment around what else is going on in your life. So even Eric's open to change. Eric likes change in lots of situations, and this is one, but his capacity at the moment is right around 0. Now we have a problem. By the way, another C word there, capacity. Just note that.
I love it. Hey, Jeff, there's a 2x2 matrix in your book right here.
Hey, yes.
Page 31.
It's my favorite.
So talk to us about this. Give us the context around this as your 2x2 matrix.
Yeah, and I'll use a metaphor to help out with this, or a story anyways. So we talk about Joe's hot dog stand. Now, Joe's been working downtown serving hot dogs for the last, no one even knows. It's just been a fixture downtown forever. And one day the city planner comes to him and says, Joe, love your hot dogs, but I got to tell you, we're ripping up the sidewalk here. We got pipes that need to go underneath. So we're going to have to move you 1 block away. And he looks down the street and says, we got an even sidewalk. I have no problem moving my cart down there. I see lots of people there, so no problem. Off I go. He moves. A week later, the same city planner comes back, has another hot dog, and says, Joe, unfortunately, we found that the situation down there is much worse. We're going to actually be ripping up the roads for a radius of 6 blocks in multiple directions, and we're going to have to move you to the other side of downtown. Now, Joe's never been to the other side of downtown. He doesn't know what it's like. So now we look at our matrix. Joe's thinking about the difficulty of the change. Now, of course, what we do as humans is we tend to catastrophize a little bit. So what are all the potential things that could go wrong? Well, there's a whole bunch of one-way streets. It's going to be hard getting that area. I have my supplies, my buns and my sausages dropped off every morning. I don't know if they can access that place. I don't know what the foot traffic is. Maybe it's low. I don't know if they speak the same language of that area of the city. Is there ethnic considerations I haven't taken into account? And I go on and on and on and on. Desirability. Well, based on all that, it's probably pretty low. So I'm perceiving high difficulty, low desirability. Is this going to be a difficult change for Joe? So by doing this, I can do it really quickly with any kind of change. This is what I do with my clients, is from the perspective of your people, when you've served up a change, do they see it as thumbs up, thumbs down in terms of desirability? Do they see if is there something in it for me, or no, this is going to be net pain? And a lot of the changes internally these days are net pain. And how difficult? Are there a lot of obstacles on the way? Can I envision my success on the other side of this change? And we started out talking about, is the future vague and fuzzy, out of control? The more out of control, the more fuzzy, the higher level of difficulty. And I end up in that bottom right corner of that matrix. So we got a tough change. Resistance is likely to be high. And it's not necessarily that they're digging in their heels. It's they're afraid.
Yep.
And now with this matrix, and this is what the book goes into, it gives you okay, based on the quadrant, here are the types of tactics that you can apply to help people through that.
Awesome.
I love that.
I really need a hot dog now. That's the issue.
Yeah, reduce and reframe the change. Exactly where I was going. Is that the idea of we use a phrase called chunk it down? Like it feels too big, you got to chunk it down.
Yeah, to do this, I call it the Ikea principle. So you go to Ikea and you buy furniture. Now, if you're like me, you're not very good at handy stuff. I'm not. So if Ikea only gave you the picture on the box of the bookcase, it said build this. I mean, it might look like a bookcase at the end, but you wouldn't want to put anything on it. But what does Ikea do? They start with step one and say, can you find these 2 boards and a couple screws and stick them in there? Step 2, can you join this part to this part? Only 2 joints. And I could do that. And step 3, I could do that. And 4, 5, 6. And by step 237, you have a bookcase. But
you have a brand new Kaflafic.
How did you know? But you get it, right? So what I've actually done is I've taken your eyes off of the end result, which is scary. I don't know how to get there, but I can do step 1, 2, and 3, generate some quick wins, generate some confidence, C word there, and off we go.
Yeah. Cool.
I like that. I like that a lot. The IKEA, you said it was the IKEA principle?
The IKEA principle.
I love it.
I actually wrote to Ikea to see if I could put their instruction manuals in my presentation. I'm still waiting to hear back.
Well, in the meantime, you should have a hot dog.
And I think something that you said, though, that is super, super important, and I reiterate this to leaders, it's not from your perspective, it's from their perspective. Is this difficult? Is this desirable? Not from your perspective, from their perspective, right? So there's a little walk in their shoes moment of, reality check there.
And you have to coach them through that, Lori. I've run that I use that matrix as an exercise in workshops and have executives do it. I give them a scenario and they're all happy to go through it and say, yeah, we got to figure it out. There's no one in that bottom right-hand quadrant. I want you to really think about. And I you give them the Joe's hot dog example and they start going, oh, I see. So yeah, they have to be coached through that.
Yeah. Yep.
So Jeff, in your book, you walk through the steps, the 12 steps here, the strategies, and you parallel it to things that governments tried to do during the pandemic. And you gave a grade, a letter grade like we got in school for each one of these strategies. And there's a couple that got Ds. They were not executed well. So lead the change got a D and remove barriers got a D. So 2-part question. Are those the steps or the strategies that you see missed most often? Or was this sort of a one-off, and this is just your assessment of how we did facing uncertainty and an unknown situation?
Yeah, is that consultant answer? It depends, right? This was such a unique situation, and I would say the odds were stacked against the world to do a good job on this. You had so much disparity in points of view. But to your question, lead the change got a D. I think I talk extensively about the fact that you can't split the role of leadership. So the pandemic beautifully illustrates where you have so many people claiming to be experts, no one knows who to trust, or they picked the wrong person. And I'm not going to say who, because that's then judgmental, right? I'll be canceled in no time. But the second one around remove barriers is often a big miss for the reasons we just talked about. We're thinking as leaders, actually, I'll go back to your example, Eric. So yeah, we've been thinking about this a long time. I'm going to announce this, the best thing, it's going to be great for the organization. Why aren't people getting it? But we didn't stop to think about, well, what are all their barriers? Why can't they see themselves being successful on the other side of the change? Back to Joe's hot dog stand. Again, the pandemic illustrated this great. Okay, If we just tell people that the vaccine is good for them, they will get it.
Whoops.
How'd that go?
Yeah.
Right. So now let's go barriers. It's simple stuff. Language. In our own city, we had a major part of the city, very multicultural. And I think they ended up having to, quote, advertise in 18 different languages just to try and to get the numbers up. Then transportation. How would people get to centers to get vaccination? Not just route and access, but even affordability. I can't afford to pay for a bus ticket. That's going to food. So that often is a miss around remove barriers. If we translate that into the work world, language still applies. So leaders often speak in terms that don't resonate with employees. It's ROI, we want to get that return. We're looking at market share, growth. We're like, yeah, but what does that mean for me and my family?
Right. Don't care.
So, I spent quite a bit of time talking about the importance of storytelling through the book. And that's how we help people connect with where we're trying to go. You got to tell a story. You got to make it about people and making their lives better.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
In your experience in working with organizations struggling with leading through change, where do you see, outside of removing barriers that we just hit on, leaders commonly missing the ball? They just get it wrong.
I'll build upon that last comment. I think it often is around the launch. So the thought that if I tell them where we're going and I present good data about it, that they'll all get on board. So I always like to talk about my wife here, and she doesn't mind. I've got permission. So when it comes to vacation time, we have gone to Mexico several times. But if I propose Mexico, non-starter, we will never go there again as a couple. Why is that? Because one day at work, one of her colleagues talked about something that happened to her friend. Something that came from her friend, that came from her uncle, that came from the uncle's nephew about, right, a situation they faced in Mexico. It wasn't just bad, it was threatening. They felt insecure while they were there. So I can tell my wife, 99% of the people come back from Mexico say they had a phenomenal time.
Yeah.
But the one story has an outsized impact. It's the outlier, but because it invokes an emotion, it's way more memorable and it has a stronger influence on behavior. So again, let's use that for good, not evil. So when we're in organizations, I work with leaders to help them construct a narrative around their strategy. And my challenge is always, I don't care what it is. You're doing an upgrade to Microsoft Windows. We can tell a story about that. I can connect that to the way you execute your business and how you deliver to your customers, whether it's an internal customer or an external one. We can demonstrate how this helps make their life better or prevents it from getting worse. And that's value. So I think leaders have to get much, much better at storytelling. It's an area of discomfort for many of them of, well, it feels like I'm talking to children. No. You're not doing it right.
Yeah, I love that. Anything that impacts emotion is going to drive behavior. We know that from how the brain works.
Right.
And so I think you can inadvertently trigger emotion if you're not thoughtful about how you communicate, the way you communicate, the consistency of it. The whole got to say it 9 times in all different modes. And,
Yes.
And all of that, right? Because inconsistencies breed suspicion, and lack of specificity breeds skepticism, right?
Okay, folks, so we're going to introduce our next C word, and that is credibility. So Lori's hitting it right on the head. Employees have a very strong BS meter, and it's not just, what you're saying doesn't make sense to me. It's also, you're leaving out some important details. I don't know what they are yet, but I know they're there, and I know they're not favorable. So if a leader steps up and regardless of a great story or facts presented, but don't talk about the pain of the journey, and folks know there's going to be pain, your credibility is being hampered significantly. Lori, great point. So So yeah, folks are very sensitive to that because there's so much that goes on in our world that, you know, misleads people. We're all bombarded with scams all the time, so that they're very sensitive to where people may be misleading them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to hit on one that we all have to deal with and nobody likes to talk about. The pandemic showed us this. This is some people. Some people just resist. They're not going to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm not changing. You're lying to me. Whatever my story is, I'm resisting the change. What do you do with those people who just won't buy in?
So first of all, the way you phrase it's important. We already know who those people are going to be when we roll out the change. They're pretty consistent. Takes us back to Lori's comment around personality. Often that's, you know, they're suspicious by nature. The problem is when they're disruptive.
Yeah.
So let's understand that if those folks go unchallenged, then there likely is to be contagion. See where?
Oh, another C word.
Eh? So, you know, even if I'm not a resistor, if I see that Eric is digging in his heels and nothing happens to him, maybe there's a reason for that. Right. Maybe Eric's right.
Mm-hmm.
And what will I do? I will say, I should wait. So my point to leaders is when you don't deal with heavily resistant people, and I'm going to go over that in a moment, then it causes other people to hesitate. And at minimum, the return you're expecting on your change is going to be delayed, and time is money. So can you really afford that? Now, I said heavily resistant because we have to treat resistance as a continuum. Yes, some people by their nature will always dig in their heels. That's who they are. And they need to be corrected in some way. You got to work with them. Maybe they didn't get the message around the benefits, and that needs to be presented in different ways. But at some point, it's also about consequence. And hey, if you can't support it in a fashion that doesn't disrupt people, then we're going to have to look at doing something else. And yes, that might end up in termination. But on the other end of the resistance scale is people who are confused, that are fearful, that they know what to do, but maybe the training was crappy. That's not a C word I want in the list. But we know that like how much of our training has gone virtual and we lose some of the fidelity that happens in the classroom. We can overcome it, but there's a lot of bad training out there. So you want me to develop customer service skills and there's no role plays. I just read about a procedure. That's not going to get me there. So resistance on a continuum. Yes, people dig in their heels. Most people just need some coaching. And that is a C word I want on the list. That's an important responsibility of our leaders today. Many do not know how to do it well, but they need to develop skills as coaches. This is how we help people through change.
Is there a wrong way to deal with resistors?
You know, it's funny. I was leading a workshop and just went through exactly what I just talked to you guys about. And we said, oh, you know what? I got the whole group of employees together. And when the person stated their objection, I called them out on the carpet and asked if anyone else agreed with them. And luckily they all said no and backed away. So like you got lucky, because public shaming is not the way to go around this. It needs to be one-on-one in a safe space. You might need to let the person shout a bit and then be very clear around next steps.
Oof. Yeah, that's a risky gambit.
Don't try this at home, folks.
And I think that's part of the just allowing people to have a reaction and not freaking out about, you know, sometimes I feel like it's better for somebody to actually extrovert their reaction in the moment than to put on a brave face and then you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, it's cathartic.
That can be like just let the emotion be there and just acknowledge it. Like I completely understand how you might feel that way, and you know, say more about that. Yeah.
One of my favorite pieces of feedback I received during a change project was, "This is the stupidest thing you could do."
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
okay, where do we go with that?
Mhm.
So it prompted a number of, okay, let's go out and talk to people. Let's see what's behind that. And we got lots of great input. And they demonstrated, okay, you say that changing the numbering system for our projects is a simple change, and leaders, it is a simple change. It's super simple. Okay, but here's the impact of that.
Yeah.
When we have an invoice come in, based on the current numbering system, which actually encodes a bunch of information like year, cost center, type of project, we can actually process that invoice in about 2 seconds. With your new numbering system, we lose all that data. I have to go look it up on a system. It takes me 10 seconds.
Mhm.
What is the percentage increase of work from 2 seconds to 10 seconds? Huge. Multiply that by hundreds of invoices. And we
Yeah.
went, oh.
Jeff, when I read that page in the book, I didn't like the new numbering system, and I just learned about the old one in the lines preceding. I'm like, well, that makes sense. I get so much data there. This new one,
Yeah.
So it was a great example of not taking the time to assess potential barriers. What looked good for one group, IT, didn't look good for many other groups.
Mhm.
But to Lori's point of sometimes people just need to be heard, we didn't end up changing directions. We came back and said, we're staying the course. We're still making this change, but we're going to do some things for you. It won't completely solve the pain you're going to experience, but it will help. And when we went live, we had zero noise about that. I think they just needed to know, hey, at least we were considered and there is some support for us. We'll get through it.
I mean, there's magic there, Jeff, and having people feel heard and validated.
Yeah. And often people want to be or they want to be heard even more than they want to be right.
Oh, 100%.
Right. Like a lot of people get it. Like, I don't get to make the call, but I need someone to at least acknowledge the impact on me or the concern that I have. And, as long as I've at least been heard, I don't have to be right. I can move on.
Well, you'll get yourself there, right? I was important enough to be considered in the process, even though they went a different direction. I'll get myself there. Versus you didn't even bother to ask. You don't even know, Jeff, how much more complicated my life's going to be because of your new stupid numbering system. Jeff, I want to ask one more question before we open it up to questions from the other folks here. You mentioned that middle managers are particularly critical when you're trying to do a quick transformation. Why is that?
Best to illustrate with a story, of course. So, leader steps up to the microphone and announces a big change. And it's pretty shocking. It's going to be a merger, going to be a restructuring, whatever. And so there's a question period, and there are some questions, but it's also kind of silent. And they wrap up the meeting, people leave it, they go back to their desk. And they sit there and they huddle up and there's some questions. And those questions, when they have them, where are they going to go? And it's to their direct supervisor. Hey, listen, from that announcement, we were wondering, number one question, what's the impact on jobs?
Yeah.
And the manager has not been briefed well or is not really savvy and says, I don't know. What's the credibility of the whole project, right?
Well, I'm losing my job. I know that.
Right. So now the flip side is it's really easy to paint that picture. I come back, I have questions, and the manager says, yes, we've been discussing that. We haven't had it all worked out yet, but that's on the timeline. Well, I'll have an answer for you in 30 days. Okay, I don't have an answer, but now I know there's a plan. What does that foster? Sense of control, right? So now we're tying these things together. So managers are so critical because they're often the first or second point of questions about a change. And on the other end of it, as we're coming up to the change, if it's going to take place, if my manager is not seen to be on board, what's my level of commitment?
Oh, yeah.
And I see this all the time. So when we're heading up to a change, I'm always on the team saying, we have to go talk to some people and ask them how they perceive their leaders to be stepping up. Really? Yes, we're going to ask the tough questions. And if it comes back and they say, not really seeing evidence that my manager's on board, then you as the executive need to go have a one-on-one with them. Because if you don't, you're risking the return you're looking for in your change.
Oof,
Yep.
that
Yeah.
is good stuff. That is good stuff. All right, I want to open it up to questions. Anybody here on the call have questions for Jeff? Talking about change, we've hit on a lot of topics here today. A lot of things that I think I know Morag, Ruby, and I have used and have leaned on, and Lori as well. What's popping for anybody? Ruby leans in because I know Ruby's got shit to say.
I was waiting to see if Morag was going to come off mute or Lori. See, they're both coughing off.
I'll go. Man, I'm coming up with all kinds of C words, but I think
it's a family show. No, it's not. It's
yeah. See, positive and negative, of course, but the control. Yeah, I think ultimately at the end of the day, it really comes down to control and comfort.
Mhm.
Like with that scenario you just expressed, Jeff, is so true, where that uncertainty just leads to this discomfort, honestly, with so many people. Where do we go from here? What's it going to look like? How are we going to get there? What's the pace of change, et cetera, and so many questions. And so calming people down, I think, is probably one of the big roles of those folks. And yeah, being a coach, we understand how great the gap is. So many people don't know how to coach and don't know how to walk through these scenarios. They just get the automatic promotion because they did some good things, and they're ill-equipped to really follow through on being able to be a true leader, I think. So
yeah, it's very true, Lori. Anytime I've brought up that as a fact that your leaders are unprepared, I've never had an executive argue with me. They're like, yeah, you're right.
Funny,
We don't do any training in that area, or we don't do any training at all for our leaders, which is even worse. But yes, but on the flip side, we can give them basics very rapidly. So I say the best friend you have is the check-in. So if I come to Lori and say, and I look sincerely in her eyes and say, how are you doing? Yeah. We've been talking a lot about this change coming up. And I got to say, I've been hearing some rumblings that, maybe folks aren't feeling as positive as others might be. How are you doing? Or one of my favorite questions, if maybe Lori's a bit shy or reserved, is what do you think is on people's minds?
Ooh,
Because
like
now
that,
Lori doesn't have to talk from her perspective.
Yeah.
Right. She can share what she thinks is on others' mind, but what is she likely to do anyways? You bet she's going to tell me what she's thinking, but she can do it under the guise of, other people are a little scared and, so it's great tactic to help people open up.
I love that. Yeah.
Thanks, Lori.
Well, that's also whenever there's all the planning for the special few who are in the know, then there's the announcement, right? Where everybody starts at their change curve.
Right.
And then there's the long tail after. And I think, right, everybody who was in the planning has this big sigh of relief on announcement day. It's out there.
It's done.
All that hard work. We can relax now.
Yeah.
Like, nerd.
The work has just begun.
That's right.
And because I act as a consultant, I often get asked, so how long do we need to keep you after we flip the switch? And I'm like, well, it's up to you. But if you expect sustained change, it's probably not 1 week and it's probably not 30 days. I always say it's a minimum of 90 to really ensure that we've embedded new behaviors. And another piece that often gets missed is what's the handoff to the business? Because that project team is going to, come apart, go back to their respective areas. And then who is there to answer questions? Who's going to make decisions? That stuff has to be worked out and is typically not done before they make the transition.
Ruby, what you got?
Well, I was thinking, I love that you talked about the check-in. I always think about a really big change that I had at my last sort of corporate gig. Our company laid off like just under the legal allotment. It was like 32% of our workforce in one day.
Wow.
And I was still there. And I remember my leader, it was Jody, someone that we all know And she did the check-ins with us daily, and she had teams that were combined. And one tactic that I love that she did was she brought us all together, and she'd be like, what questions do you have? And she created this spreadsheet of questions, and she just kept it going. And between meeting to meeting, she would go talk to the senior VP of marketing, or then she'd go to the CEO's office and start to find out what she could. And even though she couldn't find all the answers, it gave us that control, and it helped us feel like she was looking out for us. And I just thought it was so wise on that group level, pulling in questions, trying to understand where the gaps were and what people were worried about. Yeah. And then just the drop by of the, how are you doing? What do you need? You know, and if I was not having a good day, it was okay. There's something really important about that. It's okay to express and be how you're feeling today.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to fix it or shut it down.
Folks, that's best practice. I can't improve on that. So I love daily is really good, especially right after a change, and especially when you've got an emotionally charged event, which that would be. Note what she didn't do. She didn't go do a survey, right? And say, hey, folks, 1 to 5, how you doing?
Ugh.
And good luck acting on that, right? So that's another error that gets made, and so many organizations are surveyed to death. That it really needs to be personal in these emotionally charged type of events. So that's a really good share. Thanks, Ruby.
Morag, you got anything?
No, for once I've been listening. I've just been enjoying the whole conversation, because that whole change it's endless, and I feel personally I'm here.
Oh, look at your camera zooming in as you touch your nose. Hello.
You should see what it does when I touch.
Oh
no. Okay, so that was it. Under my, I've lost my train of thought now.
Jeff's Canadian. We got to keep it clean. So Jeff, where do people go to find out more about Jeff and to get the book?
JeffSkipperConsulting.com is the destination. The book is available on I think any platform you can think of digitally, hard copies from Amazon around the world. So I'd welcome that as well. I love helping. So on my site, there's a number of free downloads. Help yourself to that. I write weekly on the topic of change and strategy, always something new. So I just encourage you to take advantage of that.
Love it. His name is Jeff Skipper. The book is called Dancing with Disruption, Leading Dramatic Change During Global Transformation. Jeff, this has been great. Let's give Jeff big applause. All right. You get the big woo too, Jeff. You get the big one. All right, we're going to shift into our end of show ritual. And Jeff, as I told you in pre-show, you're welcome to stick around. But if you've got commitments in real life, by all means, meet those commitments. We are going to go into our funny things. Funny thing number one, this is a very Christmas season-y kind of thought. I don't know who needs to hear this, but stop trying to track that package. It's in God's hands now.
Refresh.
I know this one because I've had 2 deliveries that require a signature that FedEx has given up on, and I'm trying to negotiate some sort of meeting place where I can grab my packages. This one just made me giggle because it's a vampire. I have crossed the oceans of time to speak with you about your car's extended warranty. I'm keeping myself sharp by regularly asking myself tough questions like, what happened yesterday? And what was I planning on doing just now? I don't know about you people, but that's my life.
Yeah.
And in the spirit of Morag having a party, because I know Morag and I know me, this is me planning a party.
Bye.
You can get cocktail napkins that say that.
Please leave
I
by
didn't
9.
get those ones, and I have food and libations that will take us to at least 9:30.
Ooh.
Wow, going deep for the middle-aged crowd. This one made me giggle because Lori and I do this to each other, waiting for my husband to see the meme. I texted him from across the room.
Totally.
Oh, but my favorite funny thing today was from the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. And they're just reminding you, despite what you hear in the song, it is reckless and illegal to give your true love any amount of wild birds for Christmas. No partridges, no turtle doves, no geese, no French hens.
That's funny.
That's good.
All right, today's Good Feel story, it's about giving.
With the season of giving upon us, CBS's Steve Hartman goes on the road for a story about a man who lived a simple life but gave more than anyone could have imagined.
Oh, Steve Hartman, keeping the faith in humanity.
Wow.
Love it.
Today's semi-quarantine cocktail is called Slade. It's a riff on the Santa's Sleigh cocktail. You're going to need 2 cups of store-bought eggnog. Don't go making this nog yourself, folks. Store-bought eggnog, chilled. 1 sleigh from the 2003 movie Elf. Half a cup of brandy. 2003? Really? Are you kidding me? Half a cup of amaretto. A gentleman by the name of Mark Bozek bought the sleigh after the movie wrapped for $12,000. A little bit of ground nutmeg. And this used to live on his front lawn every Christmas. He donated it to that fire station that you see there in the background on the photo. And they made it a mainstay of their Christmas celebration. A little bit of vanilla ice cream. It is now in Central Park as part of the movie's 20th anniversary celebration. 4 cinnamon sticks, because this makes 4 servings. 20th anniversary of Elf. Doesn't even make sense to me. I do not understand it at all.
I want that cocktail. That looks amazing.
Right? With the sugared rim on the glass there and the cinnamon stick in it. Oh, I love it. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Jeff Skipper for being here today. Thank you all. Happy holidays. Have a wonderful time off if you get time off over the end of the year. And we will see you back here in 2024. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you had a good time and learned a thing or two at today's happy hour, please share it with your friends. If you want to join our tribe, head on over to skyteam.cloud/TCB or email us at info@skyteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again, and remember, you've always got friends at the Corporate Bartender.